Click. So a little voice just told me recording is in progress. And we're going to go ahead and start the meeting here since we got quite a crowd here. We got 53 signed in already. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to bring up my share screen here and we'll get her started. Let's see here. Go. There we go. Well, welcome January 2022 virtual APC meeting. I want to thank everybody for coming along, and we're going to go through the paces here. So this is a summary of tonight's program. We've got some from sad news up front, and we'll talk about that briefly, and I'll ask Richard to chime in a little on that. Then we have some Instagram virtual photo walk postings from Holiday Cheer, and I'll ask Chuck to talk a little bit about some of those. And then we have our membership dues, beat you over the head for dues reminder. We have some competition updates, and Pat will probably jump in on that. And then we got some what's coming down the pike, and we'll have Richard talk a little bit about that. And then we'll have Colleen Minnick talk tonight. So anyway, we'll get the show started here. And the very sad news, I don't know if anybody is not heard yet, but Ann Bernick passed away over the holidays as a result of an accident in Washington. She was up there with visiting family and friends. And to the best of my knowledge, she had a slip and fall and impacted her head, and the head injury resulted in her passing away. I don't know. I'll see if Chuck has heard, or rather Richard has heard anything about that.
No, I've not heard any more about Ann. She was a great Camera Club member. One thing if nobody would volunteer to do any particular portion of what we need to be done as a club, she would step up and volunteer. When Terry left us, she took over the annual print competition, which is our biggest event of the year. She'd organize the party, all the logistics, what goes where, make sure all the contacts were notified, the storage of what we have. She was invaluable.
Yeah.
We're really going to miss her. She was also involved with the Honor Flight America, where she would volunteer her time to take veterans up to Washington, D.C. And whether it was driving people somewhere or taking the veteran out around themselves or just volunteering to go, she did that for many, many, many years. And
yeah, that
really
was
appreciated the veterans.
I think that was the heart and soul of her being, was working with the veterans on that program. And she just in the last few months retired from the Space Coast Transit Authority, and she was all excited that she was finally going to have time to do things that she never thought she had time to do. So we will miss Ann terribly. But if we do find anything else about services or anything of that nature, we'll be sure and pass it on. Okay, highlights from our Instagram hashtag Holiday Cheer. And this is something that Chuck kind of rides herd on, and we get Instagram hashtag assigned, and we get pictures from various members. And I usually take about 4 or 5 slides here to show you some of the pictures that we have gotten. How many did we get this month, Chuck? Quite a few, I think.
Yeah, it was pretty good showing. I don't remember. We got 12 or 15, but we're always looking for more.
Yeah, and the fact that this was over the holidays, people are doing other things, so they don't necessarily have time to dedicate to a shot. But as we can see with Peter and Pat there, sometimes just the casual shot is all you need.
For new members or attendees, this is our virtual photo walk. Instead of having an in-person photo walk, we all gather at a certain location. Chuck Palmer creates a theme for that month, and we send in pictures virtually that we take on our own.
And here's for January's virtual photo walk, reflection is going to be the topic. And Chuck, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, I know it's all small font, but anything you want to jump on there?
I mean, we probably see reflection every day in a body of water or puddle or mirror, but And all of those are good for submitting this month in the theme of reflection, but I was trying to challenge people to maybe take a picture of someone or maybe even a pet who appears to be reflecting on the new year. Hopefully we can get, we've said this for, I don't know how long now, but hopefully we can get a little closer to normal in 2022. So you might find someone, as in this photograph, someone that might be reflecting on what they might experience in the new year. So capture that, send it in, and we'll put it in the F-Stop newsletter.
And that looks an awful lot like Cheryl, doesn't it?
It is, Cheryl.
All right.
If y'all, that's also on our webpage. If you go to our webpage under events, you will find that description under the events page. And I think it's probably January 23rd's date.
Yeah, I think so. So our ccbrevard.org website is actually pretty good. They got all kinds of neat things on there. Here's a reminder about the dues that we've already beat that dead horse. Competition help documents are available. If you go on our website there, they've got one little presentation by Peter for Macs and by Chuck Palmer for PCs. And part of that goes to trying to keep our competition photos for our monthly competition to 2,000 pixels on the long side. And every once in a while, we find that somebody's having difficulty getting that done, depending on what software they're using and how the software works. So there's a couple of good tutorials there by a couple of our members. Okay, from the competition director, this is going to be our themes coming up for the year. Take a look at that, and we'll get those posted on the website as soon as we can. Let's see. January is seasons / weather. So that's what we're going to have for this month, and that's what everybody should have been sending in now. The rest of them are in here. We have some open and creative months. 1, 2, 3 open and creative months this year. And those are nice because you get to submit a regular photo in your Class A or Class B, as well as a couple of pictures in the creative category. And the creative is basically anything where it's very, very evident you did significant or creative manipulation of the photograph in some way, shape, or form. And there's a better description. I mean, I'm just rambling here, but there's a better description in our website on what creative is defined as. Okay, here's the launch announcements.
Gordon,
Yes.
before we get to this, there was a question that popped up asking if people send their dues in, will they get a receipt that the dues were not received?
Bob,
I
how
know
does that
Ann
work?
used to do that, but
Yeah, Bob, or
Yeah, if you pay by PayPal, you should get a receipt from
Yeah.
PayPal. If you pay by,
Automatically.
if you pay by check, your check is your receipt,
Exactly.
and we're not taking cash anymore.
okay. I hope that answers the question.
okay,
Whoever had the chat.
okay.
Okay. There's one error on this slide. Who spots it?
1949.
No.
Like,
Oh, that's it.
There's six listed and you got 5.
There it is. That's a sharp guy if I ever saw one. I had put these slides together kind of late last week and had them all ready. And just between the time I put these slides together and going into work on Monday, when we found out that there was another SpaceX launch on the 17th that they shoehorned in there. And so I made that correction. I put it in. And then I forgot to look at the title up there where I said 5 launches. So that's the one faux pas on this one, on this particular slide. So leaving it up a little bit in case anybody's madly scribbling down these the azimuths, which are kind of important because that helps you out if you're going to do a shot, to know which direction rocket's going so you can set yourself up appropriately. Although, as you can see, most of them are daytime shots. The only one at 27th at the end of the month there is going up between 6:10 and 6:15, and the sunset, I think, is before that, but that is going to be a golden opportunity for one of those shots where the rocket flies up into the daylight. The daylight will be above our heads, and you get the blooming white exhaust from the rocket, and it makes these big blooming flower-like presentations up in the sky. So that would be a real good one to catch a streak shot and then catch some of the bloom that's up there. The rest of them,
Gordon.
yes.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, I was just going to say the rest of them. Actually, the one on the 17th is going to be another one of those just after sunset type of shots, and the rest of them are all during the day. Go ahead, Richard.
I was going to ask if you could explain your photo up there, which is fantastic, to
Okay.
Colleen, Lisa, and John, because they might not know exactly what's going on in that photo.
Okay, sure. As I mentioned before, SpaceX launches the rockets, and then when they have the first stage shutdown, they separate, and the second stage goes on about its mission. The first stage does a boost back burn, so they light their engines again and boost back towards the launch pad area, and then so it's a great big arching maneuver coming back towards the Cape, and then they have their second relight, and you get a reentry burn, and that is, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that's the reentry burn right there, just above the halfway point of the picture. And then if you can see just to the left of that boat that's in your lower right hand corner, you can see the landing burn, and that's the rocket burning coming into land. And so this one here has got the initial launch, the boost back burn, which is it looks like a little fish hook there. And then you got the reentry burn here, and then you got the landing burn there. And this was actually two different exposures, long exposures. And you can see by the star trails, it looks like a dash for all the stars. That's because I knew the exact time of the rocket burns and everything else. And I did the first one to get the launch and the boost back burn. Then I released the shutter. Then I watched my watch for about a minute and a half or thereabouts, a minute and 3/4. And I said, oh, the reentry burn's got to be right about now. So I opened the shutter again, and that's when I caught the reentry burn, which is the streak, the halfway up the image coming down. And it also caught the landing burn down at the very end. So, but this was, I can't remember which one this was. This was about 2 years ago, I think, something like that. So there's golden opportunity for you to go out if you know this kind of information, set yourself up and get yourself some good streak shots. And if you go on our YouTube site, I have a couple of training videos on the YouTube site on how to plan for streak shots, how to set yourself up, what to look for, what kind of settings you want to use, and it's generally a good idea to get a good background shot with the boats or whatever's in your foreground first, and then go and get the streak shot later, and then superimpose them in PowerPoint. I'm sorry, in Photoshop.
PowerPoint.
Yeah, right. So, okay, coming up, Richard, if you would like to talk a little bit about our events coming up here, I'll give you the stage for the February, March, and April events. Then we'll cut to tonight's.
Okay. Well, first of all, Colleen Minnick is going to be our guest presenter. She's January. Gordon, I'm sure I'll get to her in a little bit. But in February at Bobby Lane, she's going to talk about environmental portraiture and how to do it without doing it in a studio. So it's going to be on location, some in several countries, and she's a well-known portrait artist, and so she's going to give a fantastic thing. We all have family members we want to take pictures of, and so it's going to be fantastic. You'll find all this information on our website also under our programs. We're honored on March 1st having Roman your guess is as good as mine, Kerwuzak, I guess. He's an excellent bird photographer, gives keynote speeches all over the country on bird photography. And so he just moved to Florida, he offered his services, and we fortunately are able to have him in March. And as we all know, March is probably the prime month to photograph birds. They've all come from the north or from the south and are traveling through at this time of the year. So it's probably the best month to take pictures of birds. They're all breeding too. So he'll give us a whole bunch of good information, especially birds in flight too. He's a specialist on that. And then voila, we have Lisa and John Merrill. They're going to talk about the ICM photography. That stands for Intentional Camera Movement. I saw them give this presentation several months ago, jumped on an email to them saying, please talk to the Camera Club members. And tonight, so I think it's the first time since we've been doing things virtually, they asked to attend Colleen's talk. And so Lisa and John are here. You probably were able to say hello to them earlier, and maybe they'll stay on a little afterwards when we have question and answers period. So I want to welcome Lisa and John. We're familiar with intentional camera movement. That's, you know, sort of panning or zooming your lens, but they're probably going to show you 10 other ways to do it, and it's really, really fantastic. Lisa or John, if you want to talk about that little picture down there, please do, because we'll get everybody excited. It'll be a fun program for everybody.
Thank you very much. With Zoom, and I looked up Colleen and have not heard her speak and was intrigued. And I want to tell you, I've learned a lot from Bobby Lane. I had the privilege of traveling to Myanmar with her and also took a studio lighting course with her in New York City. So you're in for a treat with Bobby. We love ICM. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, we'll also include a link in the chat to an article, but it's really a fun way, liberating to play. And I think it's just one more way to add to your visual toolbox. So we do a lot of ICM coaching with our students in our workshops in the Seattle area and are continually impressed. So it's a world that is very, very fun and playful and surprising. Even when you do the same technique over and over, you may get different results, which is part of the fun for us. So we look forward to visiting in April. The shot that Richard mentioned, I created last week up at our mountain cabin where we have some Christmas lights. And it was about, I think, a half-second exposure, handheld, held the camera still for the first part and then zoomed my lens from tele to wide and got a whole bunch of them and chose this one to share. And wishing you all a very, very healthy and happy new year full of creativity. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight, and we look forward to Colleen's talk.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Lisa. That's terrific. Looking forward to yours coming in April. So fabulous.
I'd like to add one more thing about the programs is I've scheduled them through April, and I'm hesitant to schedule anymore because, you know, let's pray this COVID stuff is getting over soon. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but let's hope by April, May, or sometime in the future, we can begin meeting again. We're getting a lot of questions. When are we going to meet again? It's not going to be anytime in the near couple of months, but hopefully we can look at things. We almost tried to open up in October, November, but the Delta hit and put a whole new twist to things. So we have to consider our membership and the vulnerabilities of everybody in a closed room for a couple of hours. You know, if it was all outside, that's one thing, but inside a small room, we just don't want to take any chances as a camera club of anybody getting sick. So hopefully sometime after April, we can look at things and readdress things.
Chuck, I think you had something you wanted to discuss, bringing up kind of an intro for Colleen.
Yes, I did. I wanted to, let's see, somebody needs to stop sharing, I guess.
I've already done that.
Okay. So I had the pleasure, the distinct pleasure, hopefully you can see this, of taking a workshop with Colleen many years ago. I don't know if you remember that, Colleen, in Moab, Utah.
I do. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, that's such
It was,
a great picture.
And I had the distinct pleasure of not only experiencing Colleen and her photography, but Guy Tal and Bruce Hucko, who was our primary host. But Colleen was, I found that Colleen was not only such a great photographer and presenter and trainer. We had an extensive workshop where we had a presentation time, and then we went out in the field. But Colleen was just the life of the party and having a whole lot of fun. You will find her in that distinctive pose down in the foreground there. So that's Colleen having a lot of fun. So I wanted to surprise her with this photograph. I don't know if she remembers.
That's so great. That was such a great time.
We were having our happy hour right at the end of the workshop, and it was just a great time we all had. So thanks, Colleen, again.
Oh, thanks, Chuck.
But I wanted to share that with everybody.
All right. All right, if you stop sharing, Chuck, and then Colleen can start sharing, and we'll have our presentation. Thanks, Colleen.
I
you
love it.
Probably never had an intro like that before.
I have not, but that's the best one yet. Thanks.
There you go.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Happy New Year. We've made it another year, and that should be a very big accomplishment given what's going on with the world right now. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very honored to be here. And tonight I'm going to talk about keeping it fresh. But before I share my screen, just by a show of hands, how many of you have ever felt stuck or bored with your photography? How many are you feeling stuck and bored right now? Maybe. Well, hopefully this presentation will give you some new ideas on how to get unstuck. Oh, well, there we go. Unstuck and re-inspired, leaving the heavy weight of the past behind, maybe leaving some frustration behind with 2001 and starting the year off with some excitement, some fun, some new ideas, and yeah, hopefully you'll not only keep it fresh, you'll keep photographing, you'll keep going. So no matter where you are, if you are feeling stuck now or you're feeling bored, understand it happens. It's been happening actually for centuries. People like Homer have been trying to reach out to external sources to find these sources of inspiration, to get new ideas. And so like Homer would actually say, "Sing to me, O muse," when he was writing the Iliad, the 9 muses of Greek mythology. So being stuck is something that happens to creative types. It happens to a lot of people. I get stuck every now and then in small ways, but there's really 3 points in my photography where I really, really, really felt stuck, to the point where I felt like, should I really be photographing? Is this really what I want to do with my life? And the first time was when I first started photography. I actually am an ex-software engineer. I worked for Intel for 10 years and decided that I needed an outlet to my stress of corporate life. And so I picked up photography. It was a traditional black and white photography class. It was on Saturdays. It was really low key. I had never picked up a camera before. This is in 2001. I knew nothing about photography. So I walked into this class and I was handed this piece of equipment that was foreign to me. And I would go around to places that would mean something to me, places that were familiar, places where I thought I was seeing the world. And this is from my ex-husband's house up in Missoula, Montana, and these logging wheels that they use to build their house out of blue stained pine after a wildfire. So things that were meaningful to me. But what would happen is when I would stand behind my camera, and this is back in the film days, mind you, you couldn't see your picture on the LCD. I would stand there and I would make the photograph. I would have a vision of what I thought I recorded. But when I get my slides back or my negatives back a few weeks later, I would look at the pictures and be like, oh my gosh, what is this? And I didn't understand the technical aspects about it. I didn't know what an ISO was. I didn't know aperture. And so I would reach out to my muses, right? And say, please, somebody help me understand depth of field finally, right? And so The next time that I got stuck, so I wasn't technically proficient, and that's probably one of the most frustrating times in photography, is where you can see it, but it doesn't come out of your camera, and you can get past that if you're struggling with that. If I can do it, anybody can do it. So, but as I got more technically proficient, and I started to sell my work, I started selling my work in 2003 at art shows. I ended up selling my first photograph to magazines in 2006. By 2007, I had enough business where I left my job. And so in 2007, as I was walking out of Intel, I asked some friends, some mentors of mine, like how could I make it in the photography industry? And I got one piece of feedback that said you should go around to all of the Southwest locations, all of the icons, and you should photograph them differently. And I thought, okay, great, I can do that. I can, if I see a picture in the magazine of sunrise, I'll just go shoot it at sunset. Or if I saw it shot during the day, I would go shoot Milky Way. And so I would go to all of these beautiful locations like Antelope Canyon, for example, and I would try to make these photographs. And at first it was fun because it was all new to me. But after a while, it became really boring and really routine. And so it was really frustrating to me because I was in these remarkable places. I live in Arizona, so I'm surrounded by so much beauty, and I just couldn't figure out why it just wasn't exciting to me. I just wasn't making images I was excited about and proud about. And then the last time is kind of the epitome of stuck for me. This is the moment which transformed pretty much everything, from me being a photographer that liked to take pretty pictures to a photographer who believes in following her own creative voice and making meaningful images out of life experiences. This was the photograph. This was it. So I was out in Acadia National Park on my third artisan residency with the park. It was winter, January 2013. I was the park's first winter artisan residence, which is hilarious because I didn't own a coat. I was from Arizona. So I had been before in November of 2009 and October of 2010. But so at this point, when I made this particular photograph, I'd probably been on site in Acadia, probably about 150 days, 200 days by the time I got to this moment between personal vacations, business, whatnot. Now it's well over 450. I keep going back to Acadia because I love it. But at this point, I was running around. I knew that there was going to be decent light. I knew it was happening. It was sunrise. I had my wide angle lens. I had my graduated neutral density filters. I was running around looking for lines and foreground, and I couldn't find it. And I got frustrated. The sun came up and I pulled my camera off of my tripod in frustration. I turned to the sun and I switched to f/22, took a picture and looked at the back of my LCD and said, yep, there's another good picture. And at that point, it was like, is this really all there is to photography? Like me running around at sunrise and sunset with my wide angle lens trying to find a line? Like, is that what photography is supposed to be? And so I started researching how to get new ideas. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today comes from 2013 onward. A lot of how I do my photography today is going to be encompassed in this presentation. But there's a lot of different reasons why we get stuck. We simply run out of ideas. And there's been some studies, namely with writing. There's this idea of writer's block. We get photography block too, right? It's the same thing, just a different creative pursuit. But researchers have found that there's really 4 reasons why we feel stuck. And I think understanding why we get stuck is part of how we get out of it. So excessively harsh criticism, listening to those voices in your head, those ones that are telling you that you're not good enough, things like that. Comparing to other people. And if you think about the difference between 1970s and where we are today with social media, this is a really big thing. We get to see beautiful images all the time at any moment of every part of every day. And we tend to look at things that maybe, we're in a different place with our own photography, and it's hard to see beautiful images when maybe we don't understand depth of field or we don't understand some of the technical aspects. So it's this, we're inundated right now with images, and so I can only imagine what Singer and Barrios would say about this now in our current environment. And then the other two reasons is a lack of motivation, internal and external motivation. So external motivation is really getting down into the heart of why you're a photographer. Is it to get attention? Is it to get those kudos? Is it to get the likes on Facebook? Or is it because you just simply love being outside and you love making images and you love the challenge? Internal motivation is something that I know I struggle with writing a lot, not so much with photography, but it's, does what I have to say matter? Is anybody going to care? Like, and maybe my life isn't really that interesting. Like, I don't know. It just seems pretty normal to me. And so having the lack of internal motivation is also a reason why we would get stuck. And so part of the thing with feeling stuck is we know it gets even more frustrating when we know there's a better way. We've probably felt flow before. How many of you have ever been in a location and you've told maybe a spouse or a partner or your group, like 10 more minutes, right? 10 more minutes. And then you look down at the watch and like 2 hours have passed? You've probably experienced something called flow. And flow is something that researcher Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who actually died last year, unfortunately, he describes as being completely involved in an activity for its own sake. The ego falls away, time flies, every action, moment, and thought follows inevitably from the previous one, as if you're playing jazz. And it feels effortless. It feels like you're not even thinking about it. It's just happening and you're just sort of in this magical state, right, of euphoria. It's a blissful state. But is it, one of the questions that I'm going to pose in this presentation is it really realistic to believe that we would feel flow all the time? It's probably not realistic that we feel frustrated, but it's also not realistic maybe that we experience this euphoria all the time. And I'm going to talk more about that here in just a second. But researchers do agree on how we can find this state of being, this magical state of being. Per Mihaly, he suggests that we need to have a balance between high skill level and high challenge level. And I'm going to talk more about that in what's called the experience fluctuation model here in a second. I'm going to give you some visuals. For me, this is what I would call my external muse. When I'm feeling frustrated, I go to the experience fluctuation model. I'll talk about that in a second. Researcher Owen Schaefer also added to that you needed to know what to do. And we do this, right? We go out to a location, we pick up a camera, we know how to turn it on. We know we want to make a photograph of, swirling water at Duck Brook in Acadia National Park. We know how to do it. So I know to slow my shutter speed down. I know to reduce the ISO. I know I had to use a neutral density, perhaps, if I need to slow it down even further. I know how to identify an eddy. And I know that just because I know how to read water, because I'm a stand-up paddleboarder, I'm a river rafter. So I look for movement and water in a very different way. And then we also need to know how well you're doing at it. So for us as photographers, it's brilliant in the digital technology, in our digital age, we get instant feedback. We get to see on the LCD whether or not we've accomplished what we were hoping for. And then most of all, and I'm going to talk about this in terms of the creative process as well, is we need to be free from outside distractions. If you bring onto your location all the stresses that you have in your life, like you're paying taxes or you forgot something at the grocery store, or anything that's stressing us out, if you bring that into your process, you actually prevent the creative process from happening and you prevent flow from happening. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about some techniques for how you can relax a little bit out in the field and kind of shift your perspective away from this thought of making a photograph and producing and incorporating some of the stresses from the outside world to help you get into a zone, if you will, when you're with your photography. So with those 6 things, we have to go back to Homer. Those 6 things are things that we can actually control ourselves. So sorry, Homer, it has nothing to do with external muses. Nobody's coming to save you. So if you get stuck, we'll give you some tips through the presentation on how you can pull yourself out of it. But we're not going to look to our 9 muses to help us. So one of the things that did save me, though, when I was frustrated in 2013 is finding this model. This is the experience fluctuation model that I referred to earlier. And this shows in graphical form the balance between challenge level and skill level. And this was very, very helpful to me in understanding that as a creative type, we are going to experience a very broad range of emotions as we create, and they're all very, very normal. And so when I go back to the first major time that I was stuck, when I didn't know how to make a photograph, really, it's probably not surprising that I was feeling a lot of anxiety about not understanding depth of field, right? Depth of field took me forever to learn. So I had low skill level, but my challenges were high, photographing, fleeting light and fog. Well, of course, we're going to feel anxious if our skill level is low and our challenge level is high. And then I move on into that time frame where I was shooting mostly Southwest icons. I would evaluate my skill level as sort of a medium-ish. I was getting more technically proficient with my camera, but certainly when it came to creativity, I didn't know a whole lot. So I got bored very, very fast. As I was photographing the same thing over and over again, I was bored. I was bored out of my mind. And certainly with my 2013 experience, where again, I had reached technical proficiency, at this moment, I was not thinking about depth of field anymore. I was not thinking about settings. I just turned the camera and I snapped the shutter. And today even, I'm not thinking about a whole lot of things when I'm making a photograph. I visualize considerably ahead of time, but when I snap the shutter, it's very anticlimactic. So boredom was, had been photographing the same way, the same time of day over and over and over again. So of course I was bored. Of course I was bored. So when we talk about how do we get unstuck, how do we get re-inspired, first and foremost, it's really, I think for me, understanding that there's this whole range of emotions that we can go through. Understanding is part of the key. So having this attitude, as Dale Carnegie says, it's the way we react to circumstances that determines our feelings. So if I know that I don't have the skill levels, but I've increased my challenge level, then I sit there and I go, oh, all right, well, I'm anxious. All right, I can solve that. Not a big deal. Like I'm supposed to. I'm learning, I'm trying, like it just happens, right? But what we want to do is we want to try to get into that flow state, but we're not always going to be there, because if we're learning all the time, which I took up photography to learn about the world around me, not to press the shutter speed, not to press the shutter button. I want to learn and discover about the outdoor world around me. And so as we learn new skills, as you learn things like environmental portrait or ICM, for example, you're going to have low skill level when you first start. Nobody's great at anything when they first try it, right? But we want to sort of we want to progress over time. And so we also want to play, and that's really what challenge is. It's playing out in the field, and it's more than just, changing your lens or turning around. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we can get into more of a mental headspace to put ourselves into high challenge almost all the time. So before we go too far, I want to address the voices in our heads. And I've spent a lot of time researching this on how we do this, because I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I've got a lot of voices in my head, and I have found the most profound statement about feeling as if you're not good enough, or as if maybe you suck, you're photographing out in the field and it's not happening. So this is my very profound statement. You do not suck. Let's talk about this. So a lot of this is attitude, right? So we think we should be somewhere other than we are right now. So if you're a beginner, for example, you see amazing images, you're comparing yourself to others, of course, but you're in a different path. You're in a different pace. You're learning things at your pleasure, not at everyone else's. And that is perfect. That is awesome. You are right where you are supposed to be right now. Consider this as a journey and turn those negative voices off in your head. They are contributing. Remember, Barrios and Singer said number 1 and number 2 is negative, harsh self-criticism and comparing yourself to others. So we can knock those 2 off just by the voices in our own heads. And so acknowledge that you have been doing the best that you can, and you will continue to do that. I am sure of it. So first and foremost, to get unstuck, you don't suck. Okay. So how do we do that though? As Austin Kleon wrote, let go of the thing you're trying to be, the noun, and focus on the actual work you need to be doing, the verb. And so what I want to talk about for the rest of the presentation is what that work looks like, and in hopes that we can get ourselves into a high flow state. We get unstuck, we get re-inspired. And so I'm going to talk individually about skills. How do we develop our skills? And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about challenge, because skill is actually quite easy. There is plenty of stuff to learn, right? So I did a 10-minute free write on all the different things or aspects I could come up with regarding photography and all the things that go into it. And as I was starting to write, I think there's like over 200 things in here. And as I started writing, it was like amazing that we even make an image at all. Like there's so much that goes into a single photograph. And so it can almost be overwhelming. And I know that was for me when I first started out in 2001, it was so overwhelming because light was happening and it was like, oh my God, I gotta think about a million things and what do I do? And then Photoshop came and it was like, oh, I don't even know what to do with that. And so deep breath, pick one thing to learn at a time. And so as we start 2022, one of the things that I would encourage you to think about is, what is that one thing you want to try first? And if you have what you want to learn, if you want to drop it in the chat, that's awesome. If you want to write it down and keep it private, that's awesome too. But be deliberate with your learning. Pick that one thing. If you don't understand filters, maybe figuring out filters for the next month or 3 or 6 is where you need to be directing your efforts. If it's depth of field, whatever it is, intentional camera movement, whatever it is, just pick one thing at a time and practice it over and over and over and over until it becomes second nature. Like I said, I don't think about these things, these technical things anymore, because I've done it so much since 2001. And so Malcolm Gladwell had this idea that you needed 10,000 deliberate repetitions. Now, researchers they argue whether it's 5,000 or 2,000 or 1 or whatever it is, but the point is if you don't practice, you're not going to get better at something. And none of us are experts at anything when we first start. And what happens for me is when we practice, we build muscle memory. Because if a jaguar runs across the street under a double rainbow, the last thing you want to be thinking about is what aperture should you be using, right? So one of the things that I do to practice is I don't shoot every day. Maybe you do. I don't photograph every day. It's my full-time job. I don't shoot every day. But I am visualizing constantly. And what I mean by visualizing is visualizing your picture, picturing your picture before you shoot it. It's something Ansel Adams called dry shooting. And visualization actually has a tremendous amount of power. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about dry shooting here in a second. But I just want to give you a very small taste on visualization and how powerful it can be with this experiment. So Alan Richardson, an Australian psychologist, did this experiment in the 1960s. It's since been repeated multiple times. But he wanted to test people's abilities to shoot free throws, basketball free throws. And so he had 3 different groups. He had one group that practiced every single day, went to the gym, touched the ball, stood at the line, threw the ball into the net, or at the net at least, hopefully in the net, but visualized practicing was the next group. They didn't go to a gym. They didn't touch a ball. They just sat and they thought about making a free throw. They just thought and they went through the motions in their head and their imagination. And then the third group shot free throws on the first day and on the last day when they were tested, the 20 days, and then did nothing for those 20 days. And so they tested these groups, and the the power of practice, right? So those who practice made on average 24% more free throws on the 20th day. So if you practice, you're going to get better, obviously. If you do nothing, you get nothing. So those who shot free throws and then did nothing on the first and last day, but then did nothing, they didn't visualize, they didn't think about free throws, they didn't improve at all. So what happened with this middle group is quite fascinating. They found that it was almost as good as physically practicing visualization, just imagining it. And so one of the things that I do, again, like I said, I don't photograph every day, but I am picturing pictures all the time, like the grocery store and in my truck, sitting here watching Facebook. I'm constantly trying to develop pictures in my brain. Who knows if they'll ever come together, but I'm building muscle memory. I'm practicing over and over and over again. So this is a great way, if you can't get a camera in your hands, to make progress with your skill development. So one of the things that you can do is start with an idea. The easiest thing you could do is jump on social media, look at a picture you like. Maybe it's someone in the club. You saw a picture today that you thought, wow, that's incredible. Well, the launch picture, like that's incredible, right? Like, and so what we want to do, I'm going to talk more about stealing like an artist, not stealing from an artist, is we basically perform a critique on it. What do we like about it? What don't we like about it? How would you photograph it differently? And then you would imagine yourself with the scene. So I actually, while the photograph was up of the launch progression, I visualized myself standing there with my tripod, with the boats, with the water. What kind of equipment would I use? Would I use a telephoto? Would I need a wide angle? Would I need filters? What aperture would I use? And I would get very, very, very specific, even though I have no plans to ever go to Florida. But if I do, I'm ready. What I shouldn't say I have no plans to ever go to Florida. I don't have any plans to go to Florida in the immediate future. But if I get there, I know what to do. Or if I have a similar experience out here where I live, out in Arizona, maybe it's a meteor, maybe I don't know what it is, but I'll be ready because my brain has already gone through the process of building a photograph. And so Alan Richardson, that researcher that did that free throw study, says that the most effective visualization occurs when the visualizer feels, sees what he is doing. And so the more specific you can get about visualization, the more likely you're going to make progress. So take that one thing that you want to learn, in the next month or 6 months or whatever time frame you define, and practice it in your brain. Maybe read the instruction manual, maybe read some articles online. You could read Dear Bubbles, my online advice column, whatever it is, to feed your brain that information and then visualize pictures. How would you use this in the field? How would you use it on your next trip? What would you do? Think about that before you go out and shoot. And so skill level is actually something that we can practice pretty easily. But if the only thing we do is get better in our technical skill and our technique and our approaches, the best we can hope for is relaxation, which I'd argue is not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not euphoric flow. And so we have to balance building our skill level at the same time we play. We challenge ourselves in different scenarios, and hopefully we can match that skill level with the challenge level accordingly so that we can experience things like arousal and flow. So that's what I'm going to talk about now, is how we can build our challenge level, how we can keep that challenge level high. And the first thing for me is really changing the game of photography. A lot of the things that we've been told we need to kind of throw out. When I go out on, well, I don't go out on photo shoots, quite honestly. I go out on experiences. I don't have any expectation of making a photograph whenever I go out. The camera just comes with me to express the stories that I find or I feel at the moment. So I don't have any expectation. I'm going to talk more about Mushen and Shoshen here in a second, and what that looks like in terms of releasing expectations. Give yourself permission to play. Do you remember how fascinating the world was when you were a child? Like when everything was new, like it was just so much fun, right? So roll in the dirt, like, take your shoes off and feel the sand through your toes, things like that. Those they're going to develop perceptions. They're going to build stronger photographs. Follow your curiosity. And if you fall in love with a subject, make an image, but only when you fall in love with this subject. There's a pretty big difference between liking a photograph and loving a photograph. And viewers, I think I can sense that. And so if I don't fall in love with the subject, I'm not going to make an image of it. There's just too many things out there that I get excited about, quite honestly. So I'm not going to spend my time, my limited time on this planet photographing things that I don't really like, or like I kind of like. So, and this requires us to kind of set our pride aside. You know, I don't create work for other people. I create it for myself because it means something to me. And so if nobody likes my images, that's great. I hope that you do. I hope they're inspiring, but I don't, yeah, you got to set your ego aside in this game. So one of well, there's two things that I do to help get me into sort of this flow state. And it's a little bit about refocusing our brains, coming out of the stress of everyday life, and really getting into that mental zone to be in a creative space. And so there are two Zen Buddhism techniques. One's called Shoshen, and our philosophies, I guess I should say. And Shoshen is a beginner's mind. It's an openness and enthusiasm to learn as if you were experiencing everything for the first time. And this is something that I've really embraced as I've gone back to places over and over again. When I go over the bridge to Mountain Desert Island into Acadia National Park, my brain, I try to shut it off, and I try to feel like I've never seen the place before. I've been there 450 days since 2009. I know the park like a mother knows its child. So, but that I don't want to get stuck. I want to be inspired, and I want to see how things have changed. I want to see how I have changed as a person since my last visit. And so, as Shizuki said, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. So that's what stuck really is giving ourselves options and opportunities, or getting unstuck is getting ourselves opportunities. So the other side of this is Mushen. Mushen is being out in the field, mind without mind. So you're not thinking about things. You're just sort of relying on your intuition and all of that muscle memory that you've developed. This Mushen also gets into the heart of releasing expectations, assumptions, judgments. And so when I go out into the field, I don't judge light as good or bad. Light just exists. Humans are the ones who apply labels. I don't judge a scene good or bad. It is a palette for me to see what I can do with this. And that's where the play comes in. It's here are the cards that have been dealt to me. How am I going to put together the best hand? What can I do with this light, this landscape, and what's getting me excited? And so I don't have any expectation of making a photograph when I'm out there. I don't have any expectations that I'd make a good photograph to share later. It's just all about being in that moment and experiencing that world, because we never get that moment back, right? So here's an example of this. This is from 2018. It's sort of a long story. I'm writing a fairly lengthy memoir about my time on the Colorado River since 2015. But the short of this, the important part here is that I decided in 2018 that I was going to cross Lake Mead. Lake Mead is the United States' largest reservoir. It ended up being about 69, 70 miles, whatnot. I did most of it alone on a stand-up paddleboard. But I wanted to start the journey where the Colorado River came out of the Grand Canyon. For those of you who are familiar with the topography, came out of the Grand Canyon and met the reservoir. It's the river meeting lake. And so this is Lake Mead. The green is Lake Mead, and the muddy, silty water is the Colorado River. So this is the Colorado River becoming something it did not intend. And so I was there at 11 o'clock in the morning. I mean, high, pretty much kind of high noon light. You can see there's not a lot of shadow. And I was just so blown away by this, like emotionally. It was just such a magical experience. And so I did the best that I could. I used a neutral density filter to slow some of the water down. I got a little bit of silky water, used a polarizer, but I said, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back after I cross Lake Mead. I'm going to come back to this spot, and I'm going to camp here for a few days, and I'm going to make this photograph look good under better light. Well, that was all fine and dandy. I went across Lake Mead. 9 days later, I finished the crossing. I came out, and about 2 weeks later, I came back to this spot. Well, that's what it looked like. And I had known during my 9 days that the Bureau of Reclamation was going to do what was called a high flow experiment. They moved 2 feet of water from Lake Powell through the Grand Canyon to rebuild sandbars and refresh some of the nutrients in the canyon, and they moved that water into Lake Mead. I watched the water rise 2 feet while I was on the lake, but when I thought of this photograph, it didn't even occur to me that there wouldn't be any waves. It would look like this. And so I had all of my stuff, all of my gear, and this is the defining moment as photographers in terms of being a creative, is what do you do with this? Your expectations have been shattered, right? Like, do you pack up and go home? Do you stay? Like, what do you do with this? I mean, this was kind of like, wah, 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 right? So as Milton Berle says, if opportunity doesn't knock, build a door. And so that's, as a photographer, that's what I feel. I feel like we're problem solvers. So the other thing that I try to do when it comes to feeling stuck is I embrace improv. I had a friend who worked at Intel who actually did improv, and I went to go watch one of his shows. And it was just insane to me how, like, the actors, if you will, would come up with things like on the fly, like it seemed like out of thin air. And so I asked my friend, I was like, how are you guys doing this? And he's like, well, the key to improv is to say yes and I guess this is the heart of improv, is to say yes and so as photographers, I encourage you to say yes and to get unstuck. Acknowledge the scene that you've been given, which is to say yes, here it is. And then the and is how you're going to build upon it. And so the great thing about improv is no matter how things turned out, it was almost always funny, right? So if you've ever watched like Whose Line Is It Anyway, right? Like it's either really, really funny or it's really embarrassingly funny because it's so bad, right? And so as photographers, it's like, well, let's see what we can do with this. And it doesn't matter where I start other than I just try and I say yes and. So if you feel like you're getting stuck in a situation, say yes and. And so what I did in that situation, I did home. I stayed 2 or 3 nights in a camp and grabbed my one lens, grabbed my stand-up paddleboard. I had 1 battery, 1 memory card, like, so it wasn't anything fancy. I just got on my stand-up paddleboard. I'm going to talk about combinatory play here in a second, the importance of that. I had no intentions of making a photograph. My camp was over here, kind of off into the side here on the right, and I crossed the river. I just wanted to see what the other side looked like because I'd never been there before. And so when I got to the other side, stormlight happened. And so this photograph, I was trying to balance on the board while trying to get foreground, and it was just a blast. I didn't have a tripod. And then this happened. You can actually see our camp. Let me see if I can find my little annotate tool. Do I have my annotate tool? Where's my annotate tool? Oh, well, it's over here on the right side here. And then, well, that happened. So if I would have gone home, stayed in camp, pouted, I would not have been able to make those photographs. So definitely, I know we all want to make great images, but perhaps maybe the most important reason why we're photographers is because we enjoy these magical experiences. And so there's something called an autotelic personality, where we do an activity just for the sake of the experience, not to make any sort of result or product out of it. We're just having fun. And that's where mindfulness comes in, enjoying the present moment. And for me, I ask myself, am I having fun? If I'm having fun, I'm going to keep doing it, whether I'm photographing or not. If I'm not, I'm going to stop and find something else to do. If I'm learning about myself, then I'm probably doing okay. I don't care what my photograph looks like. I mean, yeah, I'm trying to get better every frame, but if I don't make an image, great. Like if I'm having fun and I'm learning about the world, so be it. And you don't get stuck having fun. like you don't. So the other thing that I do, well, I talked a little bit about managing our expectations. And the only expectation that I have is that, like I said in the previous slide, is that I'm learning something about the world around me. So when I got stuck in 2013, I found this magical thing called the Wallace model of creativity. And I'm right. So experts don't know where the aha moment comes from or how to trigger it, but they do know how to feed it. They do know how to feed the process. And so the Wallace model of creativity is preparation, incubation, illumination, inspiration, and verification. And how I translate that into my image making life cycle is filling my brain with knowledge and ideas. That is the only expectation I have, whether in life or I'm standing in front of a scene. That is my only expectation, is that I'm learning about something. I'm filling my brain with something. And I would call that pre-visualization. Anything that you do before, any raw material you put into your brain before you visualize it. So incubation is that visualization. So, it's asking those what if questions. What if I stand on the left? What if I stand on the right? What if I use an aperture, a wide aperture or a small aperture? What if I use a filter? All of those things. And then we need to stop thinking. That's that release from, outside distractions that Barrios and Singer talked about. We've got to turn our brain off. And then illumination, inspiration is when we actually create the image. We actually press the shutter, and then we verify whether the idea, the visualization that we had, worked or not. And we like to think about, as we call that, critiquing or polishing our photographs and processing, for example. So Minor White would call that post visualization. But so this is, I trust the creative process. And if I move my outlook away from producing a photograph and into just learning, it actually makes making a photograph a lot easier. Because your brain sort of already knows how to do this. Your brain subconscious process called conceptual blending. How many of you have ever had a weird dream before? Anyone ever had a Is anybody still awake? Maybe people are dreaming right now. Yeah. If you've ever had a weird dream before, you've experienced conceptual blending. Conceptual blending is a subconscious process. It happens when you sleep, because that's when your prefrontal cortex, this thing right up front in your brain, that's when your prefrontal cortex goes to sleep. Your prefrontal cortex is your social filter. It's the thing that stops you from saying really stupid things. Some of us have better developed filters than others. Artists are notorious for not having filters. They just let it flow, literally flow out of their brain. They don't have anything to stop it. And so conceptual blending is essentially taking two existing ideas and putting it together in new and different ways. Creative experts agree that nothing is original. We can argue that. Nothing is original. Everything comes from something else. And so all it takes is two existing ideas put together in a new and different way. Think about like your iPhone. It is one of the most technologically advanced examples of conceptual blending. We had phones before, we had calculators before, we had the internet before, right? Now it's all put together. It's a conceptual blend. Buffalo chicken pizza is a conceptual blend. We can also do this, we can also play this game with our photographs. And so what I would encourage you to do is literally dream while you're awake. That's how we keep our challenge level high. Ask yourself when you're out in the field, what else is it? And this is our way of connecting individuality with the landscape. Some of you isn't original, perhaps, or you feel not different enough. And so if you ask yourself, you play this game, what else is it? That comes from a Minor White quote. You can get into using the metaphorical the information in your brain and make metaphorical associations. So if I was standing in front of this scene, this is in a creek, and I call this liquid aurora. To me, it looked like the aurora borealis. It was just this magical, it was dancing. The colors were moving around, the reflected light from the trees around this creek, it was just moving. It looked like an aurora borealis. if you've never seen an aurora borealis, if you've never seen the northern lights, you probably aren't going to make that association. You may look at the scene and you may see it totally different, which is exactly what we want to have happen. So the purpose of feeding your brain knowledge and ideas is to give yourself as much raw material as possible in game. So you've probably been doing this before, you've done it before. There's something called pareidolia. Have you guys ever looked up into the clouds and been like, oh my gosh, look, it's a dragon, or look, it's that's pareidolia. It's your brain making order out of chaos, based on what you already know. I'm sorry to say that there are no dragons in reality in the cloud. What I want to do is make those associations using the material in our brains already with the landscape around us. That's how we can individualize the landscape. And so I know a lot of people, when I introduce this concept, think, well, Colleen, that's great, but it's only for intimate scenes or it's only for macro. And I'm like, well, no, wait, you can do this with landscape photographs. This is from 2013, right after Blizzard Nemo, a winter storm 2013. I had never been in a blizzard before. And so this was during that third artist in residency. And I went out the day after the high tide hit at the peak of the blizzard storm. And it was like just pure pandemonium. And so I went out to go see what the landscape looked like. And I don't even remember stopping the car. This is along Ocean Drive. For those of you who are familiar with the area, the Otter Cliff is in the background there. And in this moment, I went out and I'd never seen anything like this before. And in this moment, I saw a bunch of jumping cholla. Yes, it is ice, but I'm from Arizona and we have jumping cholla everywhere here in the Sonoran Desert. And so I saw the ocean as my desert and the desert as my ocean. And so in this moment, and so you can make these metaphorical associations as you're in the field. And here's the thing, you can make a photograph for any reason you want to. And hopefully it's meaningful to you. That's why I make images, is because they mean something to me and I want to remember them. So the other way that we can get new ideas, and we sort of play this game, is stealing like an artist, not from an artist, but like an artist. This is a book by Austin Kleon. I would highly recommend the read. I'll recommend it in my recommended reading at the end. But he also, like many of the creative experts, believe that nothing comes from nothing. It has to be, you're inspired by something somewhere else. And so anytime we have inspiration, we see photographs that we like, or a painting we like, or a song we like, whatever, we can ask ourselves how this is useful in creating images. And so it's not plagiarism. We don't want to copy. We don't want to run to the location. I don't want to run.
Colleen?
to,
Hello, Colleen? Oh,
you know, Monet's home in France to copy software term called GIGO. Yeah.
Yeah, Colleen, for
there?
30 seconds or so there, you seem to drop out your audio. It got real slow and bogged down. Not sure whose end it's on, but
Are you there?
yeah. So if you could just make sure that your audio is up and good, and if you want to just take a breath, maybe it'll catch up.
Oh.
Colleen, now you're frozen.
All right. Oh, interesting.
Okay, we can hear you now, but your share screen's gone away.
Yeah, I turned it off. I'm checking my internet.
Yeah, I'm guessing
Any
that
better?
You sound fine right now.
you're fine right now. It's when you were sharing your screen that your audio bogged down.
Interesting. Let me try again.
Okay.
Better?
No, it's not any better.
It's almost as if you're trying to push too much data across your internet link.
Interesting.
Do you know anybody at Microsoft who can do a house call?
I've never had that
Good
trouble
luck.
before. Um, I'm not sure. I could pop off I could try to rejoin the Zoom maybe. I don't know what else to do.
Want to try that?
Let me try to share my screen one more time. Did it work?
Oh, almost.
There we got the screen. We had the screen.
It's almost like a delay. Interesting. I'll leave it at. I'm not sure. I've never had it happen before.
It
Okay,
says her network bandwidth is low.
Your internet provider throttling your band usage.
Yeah,
My network band?
yes, the bandwidth is,
Interesting. I'm not getting any message on my end.
hmm,
Well, you're starting to sound better
Um,
now. It's almost like it's recovering. So maybe if you just pace it a little bit and see if you can keep up.
All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to try this and definitely holler if I freeze again because frozen is not part of the presentation. Okay. So I think I was with the software engineering term called GIGO. Have you
Yes.
guys heard of GIGO? Have you guys ever heard of GIGO before?
Yeah. He used to be a member of the club, but he resigned.
I love it. Yeah, so GIGO is garbage in, garbage out. And so as software developers, we would build a frame of an application, and it was our customer's responsibility to fill the application with data. And if the data was bad, it didn't matter how good the application was, bad data was coming out of the application. And so think of that in terms of your brain. What goes into your brain is coming out in your photographs, whether you know it or not. And so if we're using the creative process, we're using conceptual blending, we're using metaphorical association, whatever is in your brain is what you're going to be using as raw material. And so I spend a lot of time trying to fill my brain with things that inspire me. I don't spend a lot of time with things that stress me out. I'm an informed citizen. I don't have cable TV. I don't really watch much news. I am definitely trying to fill my world with as much inspirational things and exciting things as possible. And so think about that. How are you feeding your own brain? And that's when I talk about stealing like an artist, it's about getting inspiration from anywhere and everywhere. And so here's an example. The very last speaking gig, I told this to Richard the other day, my very last speaking gig before the pandemic was in the Villages in February of 2020. So I was out sort of in your direction and I was waiting to do my presentation and I was sitting in my hotel room and I looked at this image on the wall and I could not believe that, well, I loved it. I thought it was totally great. This is a horrible image of it. It's an iPhone snap of it, but I loved this painting on my wall. And I couldn't believe that I had never associated the bokeh effect, those circles that you get with a wide aperture and certain lighting effects, with bubbles. And I love bubbles. I like my mind, anytime I see bubbles, my brain kind of goes like bonkers. And so I snap this thing. I snap things that inspire me, like paintings or patterns in a chair, whatever it is, and I put them in my phone. And I have an inspiration from anywhere folder so that when I feel stuck, I get ideas and I go through them. And it's like, oh, well, how might I use this? And what I did is I reverse engineered this. I made this whole image in my head of what I would do with it if I were ever out in the field with grasses. Grasses isn't something a whole lot of thing we have out in the desert, but if I ever got into grasses, how I might photograph that. And so I had this whole vision in my head and then I went and I forgot about it. It was gone, like poof, visualized, gone, had the idea, fed my brain, went off, did the presentation, did the workshop, and then went home. And so about 6 months later, I was out camping in Utah, and I hadn't thought about this painting at all. I was out and I was writing. I wasn't doing any sort of photography, and I just so happened to pull up Instagram. And my friend Deborah Hughes, who I mentioned before the presentation started, she posted this phenomenal image of intentional camera movement and multiple exposures. And I tried to reverse engineer it. She just does pure magic. It's so amazing. I tried to reverse engineer it, and then I looked at the grass and I'm like, oh my gosh, I had the idea back in February with this grass. I know what I'm going to do. And so, having not really ever used the overlay function in my Olympus camera, I shoot mirrorless Olympus, OMD EM1 Mark II, as a matter of fact. I had never used the overlay before, so my skill level with it was low, right? But I just started playing, and I started moving the camera up and down, and then moving, rotating the picture in camera, and then doing it again and overlaying it, and then keeping things sharp. And this is what I ended up with. I call this the tartan of the wheatgrass. And had I not had that experience with the grasses in February in Florida and not seen Deborah's picture, I would have probably never put this together, or it would have taken me a long time to do that. So those are two different ideas coming together in a new and different way. So I don't want to copy Deborah's work. I want to make my own, and I want to try doing my own things with it. And so Lisa and John will no doubt help you with intentional camera movement, but this just happened I don't know, in October in Great Smoky Mountains. And I did not only intentional camera movement, but in the first image I did intentional camera movement and zoom pull in the same image, and then just randomly snapped the ground and then overlaid it in camera. I was on a workshop teaching my attendees how to do this, and it's this figure ground illusion. It just keeps going back and forth. And so again, sometimes ideas can take some time. So if you're feeling stuck, just playing can eventually get you warmed up and eventually out of it. So I mean, this is almost a year-long process to get to this point. So play. As Albert Einstein said, creativity is knowing how to hide your sources. So far, so good. I'm coming into the home stretch here.
Yep, you're sounding good now. Back to normal.
Good. Okay, good. So one of the ways that you can make better photographs is not think about making photographs. I know that sounds weird, but you need to do what Albert Einstein called effective abstention, not think about it. And what like writing, for example, do something else besides photographing that you enjoy, and then the photographs will just sort of happen. And so Albert Einstein called this combinatory play. What do you enjoy doing beyond photographing the landscape? Do you like drinking wine? Do you like watching rockets? What do you like to do? And I like to say that I'll try everything at least once. I just got a iTunes update. Maybe that was it. I just got a.
Yeah, there's a good chance that your bandwidth was completely schwacked by Apple sending stuff to you.
That's exactly, yeah, I just got a notice that Apple just did an upgrade. Yep, that's what it was. Sorry, that was not planned. And I'm on a PC, so anyway. Okay, so I will try everything except for bungee jumping, skydiving, and swimming with sharks. And I don't have to be good at it. I'm just going to try it for the experience, because you might find something you're excited about, but you also can make new associations in your photographic work with it. So I spend a lot of time, like I said, stand-up paddleboarding. Here's me getting ready to stand up paddleboard Meander Canyon. This is on Lake Mead. This is the first night I was on my own. This is 12 miles from any boat ramp. You can't hike to it. It's in the middle of nowhere. And so by doing stand-up paddleboarding, I get myself into different situations. This was a challenge because I had never seen the gypsum reef before. I've loved geology, but I've never seen this type of landscape in Arizona. It's very unusual, and it's very unique to just this one little spot in Lake Mead. And sometimes it's underwater, and in this case it wasn't. But I also take adult ballet. I take point classes. And so when I go out onto these rivers and I go into the world and I look at water, I think about the movement that I do in my my gym, in my studio. I think about PKs, I think about pirouettes, I think about how is the water moving, and I try to make those mental associations. If you have never seen a ballet or don't know anything about ballet, you have no idea what I'm talking about. That's awesome. You've got your own package of raw materials that you can use in your, wherever your camera takes you. So, and that's what we want. I recently had the great fortune of meeting Jean Falk Adams. Jean Falk Adams is Ansel Adams' daughter-in-law. She is married to Michael Adams. And so I have spent a fair bit of time with her. I'm involved in an exhibition with her and Ansel Adams prints that I could talk about a little bit later if you're interested. But she is a very, very remarkable watercolor painter. And I had never watercolor painted before. We went camping last January together, and she was like, "You got to try this." And I was like, "All right, I'll try anything except for bungee jumping, skydiving, and swimming with sharks." And so I started watercolor painting, and I'm horrible at it. This is what it looks like. But it doesn't matter that I'm good or bad at it. What it taught me is that I thought that I saw the landscape. I thought I saw detail. I thought I saw shadow and highlight. I do not to the level that watercolor painters do. And so it has changed the way that I see layers and light and just small details in general, and how cracks in the cliff work together. I mean, it's like so precise and so detailed. So I am never going to become Picasso, but it has helped my photography tremendously. So if you're stuck, go do something other than photographs. As appropriately, Ansel Adams said, you don't make a photograph just with a camera. You bring to the act of photography all the pictures you have seen, the books you have read, the music you have heard, the people you have loved. I have to be honest, when I first heard this quote, and I heard it very early on, probably around 2001, 2002, I had no idea what Ansel was talking about. I was like, dude, you just show up, you get pretty light, you shoot, you just shoot. And that's relying on the external sources like Homer, right? Like the external muses. And we actually bring the creative juice to every situation that we encounter and we experience in our life. And so I don't have, when it comes to getting stuck or unstuck or inspired or uninspired, getting re-inspired, is I don't really have a line between photography and life. They run together. And a creative photography really stems from having a more creative life and asking yourself as you have these new experiences is, how is this useful to me in creating my images wherever I'm at? And so when we think about playing, we think about Mushen and Shoshen, we think about conceptual blending, feeding the creative process. It's all about giving your brain the space to have this raw material to use for the subconscious process. Your brain already knows what to do, right? Like it already knows how to conceptually blend. It's just a matter of us tapping into that as photographers. And so as long as you're learning, as long as you're creating that raw material, you're going to never use out of material to use in the creative process. And so it actually becomes very difficult to get stuck because you always have things you can be working on. So as you proceed with this, inevitably those voices that's negative self-criticism, that harsh self-criticism is going to come back, and fear is going to creep in. You're going to be like internal dialogue and be like, oh my God, are my images good enough? Are people going to ever like this on Facebook? Am I being too weird? Like, is anybody going to get this? Like, I tell stories about my photographs. Is anybody going to care? What if nobody likes it? And so my feedback to that is, who cares? As it turns out, nobody is watching you that closely. Everybody is too concerned with themselves and what their lives are doing, and nobody really cares if you make an image or not. And I don't mean that to mean discouraging. I actually mean that to be freeing, because if nobody cares, then you can create exactly what you want and gets you excited. And so fear is never going to go away, that fear of acceptance, unless you plow through it. So if you recognize yourself going, oh, I don't know, I suck, or I don't know if this is going to work or not, or people going to like me, just do it anyway and just have a blast doing it. Learn something out of it, and you won't ever get bored. You won't ever get stuck. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Hopefully I have not frozen again. The keys to keeping it fresh and getting unstuck is simply to be mindful of your attitude. And understand that flow is one of the many things that you can experience. Hopefully we can get into that euphoric state by increasing our skill level and matching it with a high challenge level, but it's going to take some work to get there. And so pick one thing to master at a time and practice, 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 practice. If you can't get out there with your camera, definitely dry shoot, use visualization to help you make that progress. And then when you're out in the field, release those expectations, get rid of those expectations, throw them out, and embrace Shoshen and Mushen so that your brain has the capacity, it has that space. You don't have those outside distractions bogging you down. And then still, like an artist, to continually feed your brain idea, build that raw material base so that your brain can do the conceptual blending, it can play the improv game, and you can grow in many different ways beyond photography. So living that creative life. And as I just said, plow through that fear and that idea of failure. It's not failure if you're learning. So keep learning, keep going. And as Pablo Picasso says, inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. So with that, here are some resources that I have found very, very useful in following this sort of philosophy and this approach with my own work. Haley Csikszentmihalyi has a number of books, but flow is definitely one of the dominant books in this sort of genre. There's conceptual blending if you want to learn more about that. Austin Kleon has a couple of books that are also very, very good. And if you want to watch a video that'll just sort of get you off to a great start this year, I would very much recommend Elizabeth Gilbert, Your Elusive Creative Genius. She is known for Eat, Pray, Love. If you didn't love the book, that's okay. Listen to this talk anyway. It's a great, great talk about creativity and where it comes from and how to sort of grab onto it. And then I also have, I'm going to talk a little bit about Dear Bubbles. Dear Bubbles is my online photography column. I take questions from my community and I answer them. I was answering them for a year. I did it once a week, and now I'm back to once a month. So I have a Dear Bubbles coming out tomorrow, but the things that I've talked about today, you'll obviously have the recording, but I also wrote an article about keeping it fresh on Dear Bubbles back in February of 2020. So if you're interested in that, the URL for that is dearbubbles.com. I'm going to take some questions if you guys have them tonight, but if you have them after the presentation, you can always send them to me. Bubbles is one of my many nicknames, so I'm Dear Bubbles. Couple of other learning opportunities if you enjoy, but wait, there's more. If you enjoyed the presentation, I'm giving my next live webinar. I've been doing webinars, with the pandemic, all my in-person teaching went online. And so I was doing a bunch of webinars. I have a live webinar that I'm going to do called Making the Photos, the 2021 edition. It's basically featuring 8 images from my last year and talking through how I made them. So that's on January 13th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I just announced that through my newsletter today. So if you're interested, jump on my website and I need to actually put the link up there today, but it'll be up there tomorrow. I have other webinars on demand on a variety of topics. I will direct you to the 3 that are free: critiquing your own work, human perceptions and composition, and then visualization. If you're interested, those are all on YouTube, all available from my website. I am back to in-person workshops, which is very, very exciting. A fair number of my workshops have sold out. I do have space available in my Grand Canyon rafting retreat. I have 1 spot left, and my Oregon Coast and my Great Smoky Mountains Sheography workshops. Sheography is a conceptual blend. It is my all women's photography workshop offering. So I do have co-ed workshops, but if you're interested in my workshops, definitely jump on my website and get signed up on my newsletter. That's where I announce them first, and they tend to sell out about a year in advance. So I would love to help. I'd love to show you how these techniques, we put these in practice out in these beautiful locations. I'd love to see you out there. If you can't get to a workshop, I do have books. Analemma Press is my publishing company. I got bored one April and thought it would be really fun to be a book publisher. So now I publish books. I published 3 books last year. I came out with a 2nd edition of my Photographing Acadia guidebook. I published a friend of mine's book called Another Day Not Wasted, and I produced an exhibition catalog called The Current Flows, Water in the Arid West, that matches the exhibition that's going on right now with Jean Falk Adams. So those are all available through my website. You get a little bit of discount if you want to order some of those. Would love to get that to you. Keep the learning going throughout the year. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. If there's anyone still awake, I'd be happy to take questions.
Don't forget to unmute yourself if you're muted.
Yeah, this is Gordy, Colleen. I was a little fascinated by your, what we would call a quad chart. It's more like a pie chart in your parlance there. But do you ever decide, today I just don't want to be a flow. I'd rather be inspirational, or I'd rather be this, or I'd rather be that. Do you ever target other areas of your quad chart?
I don't actually think of the quad chart.
You don't think of it? That's just kind of a philosophical, academic exercise?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Yeah, it's, for me, it's just a way to present the different types of emotions. I don't go out and be like, oh man, I'm gonna totally get in flow state. You can't actually force it anyway, but I'm gonna totally get in flow state on this hike. I don't. I go out because it's fun, and I go out to learn. Those are my two real expectations, if I have any expectations at all. And flow is what happens.
Okay.
Because of the circumstances.
Okay.
Do I have times where I'm like, I'm just going to focus on intentional camera movement, for example? Am I just going to spend, this afternoon playing with overlay? Am I just going to play with this? Absolutely. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yep.
But I don't think about, I think I'll feel anxious right now, right? Right. I think I'll feel relaxed right now. Those are byproducts of their circumstance, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let me come out of that in case people want to come back to this. We'll go here. Yeah. This was very helpful to me when I was feeling frustrated very early on in my photography, really in between 2001 and 2013, I spent a lot of time being very frustrated, very bored, like I would say a lot of this time. And when I saw this chart, when I saw this model, it was almost relief for me. I was like, oh yeah, of course I felt that way. And so now it's like when I get into a situation where I'm trying something new, it's like, okay, if you feel a little, frustrated, this is why. And so it becomes very manageable. I'm very mindful about the emotions that are going on. Yeah.
Colleen, this is Richard. I can actually attest to that. There's been a couple of times in the last 20 years, I have not been in the flow state at all. I've had anxiety or worrying about something, and I could never take photographs if I'm not thinking I can be in that flow state. Whether I am or not all the time, I don't know, but there's definitely times where you can't get there.
Yeah. And that's okay.
I know.
It's going to happen. It doesn't mean that you're it doesn't mean that you're a bad photographer. It doesn't mean that you should stop being a photographer. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that you're having just a little harder time with stuff right now. Yeah. It's okay.
Yeah, I have found myself drifting towards the flow state, only to get hauled back to reality by Walter, Walter's my dog,
Yeah.
who's got some other priority in life, usually in a different direction from where I was going. So
that's that free of outside distraction.
Yes, that oftentimes
right
doesn't happen.
Right. Where is it? Yeah. There it is, right there.
Yep.
I have a question for you. You mentioned there's two states to approach it as you're walking along and visualizing things. One is in the, I'm going to get these wrong, Shoshine state, where you're not thinking about anything.
Shoshen is beginner's mind.
And then
Mushen
you
is the
have
one.
the motion state where you're thinking all these technical things.
Nope,
you-
you don't want to be thinking about Mushen. Nope. Mushen
There's
is
no
not
way to
thinking.
combine both of them at the same time.
If you're thinking, your brain is engaged. You're activating the part of your brain that is actually fully engaged, and that's when creativity does not happen. They're different systems, and so if you are, you're just in a different state. It's not bad to be thinking about things, especially if you're not, sure about the technical aspects, that's fine. But when you're going to be in the most creative state and the most likely to get into flow is when you're not thinking at all.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Shoshen is really bringing curiosity and an openness to learn. So this is treating everything, even if you've seen it a million times, like you're a beginner. Yeah, so hopefully you can see those two on the screen there.
So it's like you're driving down the road and you see a scene. You're in your motion thing. They say, "Hey, that's really cool," and you're not thinking about anything else.
Yeah,
So you
I
put
mean,
it
this
away,
is,
go, love to do that someday.
yeah. I mean, like, so you're walking down the beach, for example, and you see a shell you've never seen before, or you've seen a shell that you've seen a million times, but it looks different.
Music
And you go, oh my God, like that's incredible. And then you just sort of lose yourself in it. That would be part of Shoshen and then Mushen, and just studying it, and maybe you make a photograph and maybe you don't. And you're not judging whether it's a good shell or a bad shell. It's just there it is, and you love it and you're connected with it. Like that's what Mushen would be.
We had an annual print competition about 3 years ago, and we always have a People's Choice Awards where everybody brings their prints and sets them up, and we have judges, but then all of the members of the club that are there vote on what is their favorite picture. And the winner of the People's Choice Award was a photograph that was taken where the photographer was walking along during an art show or one of the, some Cocoa Beach art show or something like that. And there was a guy sitting on the side of the curb playing guitar or something. And he didn't stop and put the camera, do all this. His camera was dangling by the side of his hip. And all he did was reach over and he hit the shutter button and kept on walking and never knew it. And he won the People's Choice Awards.
There you go.
That was Richard Thompson.
Oh, there you go.
You remember that one? You remember that one, Richard?
I do, but it was actually in Savannah, Georgia at night with a guy reading a book. And
Well,
it was
it's
like
close.
midnight
Well,
with
that's
one little light
it's close
shining
enough.
on the guy.
I was close.
It's the, I
But
mean,
I
that's
actually had my
the
camera
concept,
set in case I needed a shot like that. So I had pre-thought of if a picture happened, my camera was already set.
That's visualization right there. Yep, that's it. So you're ready. Yeah.
So, well, let's see. If you want to unshare your screen there,
Yep.
we'll see if anybody else has got any questions. I don't see anybody chiming in right now, but has anybody else out there got some questions for
Glad to see
Colleen?
people are still awake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Colleen, this is Ann. What percentage of the time do you use post-processing?
All the time.
All the time.
100%.
And did you start right away?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. So with my work and sort of philosophically, I photograph in RAW, and RAW is not an image. RAW is data. And so when I'm out in the field, I try to get the very best data I possibly can to be able to expand my vision in the digital darkroom. And so when we optimize the data for RAW, it comes out of our camera not beautifully. It comes out sort of washed out, low contrast, basically. And so all of the images that I present have been worked through some form of processing. And in my Making the Photo webinar, I'm going to talk about processing and how I process each of my images. And I have kind of what I've called a bubble standard, which is I stretch my histogram because I'm exposing to the right, I don't have any contrast on the left. And so I move my sliders so that I stretch all of the data across the entire tonal range. I use graduated neutral density filters, both in the field, physical filters, and in processing. My favorite thing in the whole world is vignettes. Vignette solves all world problems. There are a couple of things that I don't do in processing. I don't do any saturation, which some people are surprised by. I don't do any saturation. I don't do any vibrance. I don't crop. I do all of my cropping, my composition in camera. I will use something called warp if I'm in the field and I don't like something in the corner, I don't like, the way the line was going, I will warp my image. But digital, for me, Photoshop, Lightroom, whatever your choice of software processing is for me, it's just simply part of the process. And I don't like to spend a whole lot of time behind the computer. I'm an ex-software engineer, left my job, didn't love it. So I'd rather be in the field, but I do feel if we're exposing raw to maximize data, we do need the power of the digital darkroom to help us deliver our vision. So 100%.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You mentioned Ansel Adams several times. What I first read when I first got into photography were his 3 books, The Print, those 3.
The negative,
yeah. Yeah, but what impressed me the most, and what I'm afraid digital gets everybody away from, was he saw the image the way he wanted it to be, the way it was in his head, and he knew how to make that happen from camera to paper by way of the darkroom. And what is it, Moonrise over
Moonrise Hernandez.
Yeah. The way he created that one image is the fellow that was walking along and snapped a shot of the guy reading the book. Because he literally jumped out of his car, climbed onto the roof, he had a platform on the roof, and set up a freaking view camera to take the picture. And, I first started with Mamiya RVs, and I was shooting weddings. And what I have to thank you for and appreciate is you get me thinking about different ways to take pictures of something other than my grandkids playing kids sports. Because that's about all I've been doing for the last 5 years. I stopped shooting weddings. As much as I love them, everybody's got a cell phone now, so they think they're Ansel Adams. They think they're famous wedding photographers, and it's not worth the aggravation.
Oh,
But
certainly, yeah.
Yeah, but getting back to shooting images, not pictures.
Yep.
That's the hard part.
Yeah, so Ansel, I mean, obviously I didn't meet Ansel, but I've had conversations with Michael, who was actually there on Moonrise Hernandez. I've actually seen an original print of Moonrise Hernandez in Ansel's Carmel house. I got to stay there last summer. It was mind-blowing. Anyway, he was very deliberate, and he had, like you said, he had this process of seeing it in his head, visualization, producing it through the camera, and then using the darkroom to make it happen. And I think one of the important things to know about Moonrise Hernandez is the way he visualized it at the time he made the photograph was not how he ended up printing it. And so part of creativity is giving ourselves flexibility to make, we can have expectations, we can have a direction, we can have a vision, whatever you want to call it, but being flexible and being like, no, I actually feel like this today, or I feel like that today. And so that visualization presentation that I did with Stingray last year, one of the webinars that's free, talks a little bit about not having the expectation and giving yourself sort of that space. There are a lot of right answers in everything, but especially in photography. And so what might be a right answer, 20 years ago isn't a right answer now. And that's okay. That's growth. You're allowed to change your mind as an artist. Like, you're allowed to do that. And I think to your other point, having all of that background with photographing your grandkids and your weddings and all of that, you may not necessarily focus on those specific subjects anymore, but you're going to carry that as raw material into whatever you do photograph. So like, for example, you're going to see water a very specific way. I don't know if your grandkids are like playing soccer or golf or whatever it is, but you're going to bring that to your bird photography or landscape photography, whatever you decide to do. That's coming with you, and value that. As frustrating as it may have been for you, value that, embrace that, and use it, because that's where you're going to get your own unique voice out of subject matter that we all see every day. That's how you get the extraordinary out of the ordinary, at least in my opinion. So,
Hey, Colleen,
good luck with that.
A couple things. First of all, I don't know if you've taken a look at all of the various members here, but there's a guy down there named Robert Sharp who seems to have an abundance of bubbles around him. You might want to know. Way to go, Rob.
A+. You get the gold star, Robert.
The second thing is that there's a question in the chat about warp. What does it do and not do?
Warp is a function in Photoshop. Do you mind if I do a live demo?
Oh, it's fine. Go ahead.
Easier for me, I think, to do a live demo. Let me see if I can pull up an image here really quick. What might be a good image to do? Oh, I could do that. Well, that one I just did. So we'll do, let me get this.
So it is definitely a Photoshop thing then.
Yes, it is not, as my understanding, it is not. Well, I wonder if you could do it in Lightroom. Could you do it in Lightroom? It's a free transform little tool.
Oh.
Let me see if I can get this image to work here. I'm going to show this one in my webinar next Thursday, but I just worked on it.
Well, while you're doing that, I'll comment that we seem to have two Dennises in the group, and I don't know why. Do you have two cameras, Dennis, or am I seeing double? Nope, he has one of those bifocal cameras, I guess. Okay, back to you.
Okay, I'm going to bring up an image. This is the raw unprocessed image, and I'm going to just real quick, I'm just going to hit auto so that you can get an idea of what it looks like. Do that. I'm going to do a little graduated neutral density filter. Come back up in here. Let me just get it so it's sort of manageable here. Okay, so warp is something that I use to straighten horizons. I use it to move things out of my corners. It is especially helpful if you don't want to impact the integrity of the composition, but you want to change things. So one of the things that we've got this tool, we've got the ruler tool. Like, for example, if this was a crooked horizon, what it will do is I'm going to pretend right now, okay, this isn't a crooked horizon, but I'm going to it'll straighten the layer. Let's say that I needed to straighten it. And what we see is that Photoshop, the algorithm turns it, and we get these spaces over on the right here. Let me see, where's my annotate? I can't seem to find my annotate. It's really weird. Okay, I wish I had my little tools. But you can see how it leaves these little gaps on the side here. Well, that means that I'd have to go in and crop my photograph, and I don't really want to do that. By the time I'm in Photoshop, I don't want to crop my image, and so it's taking off significant parts of the composition, and it in some cases can actually change your image entirely. So I don't love that. Instead, I would warp it. So let me come back up here. And the reason I bring this up, this particular image up, is I warped this image. Like I said, I just worked on it earlier today. I warped this image because this little calcium spot looked like a whole bunch of bird poop. And I just, it just wasn't doing it for me. So I could have clone stamped it. I could have, but then I also see that there's some lines here that I can emphasize a little bit more. So I'm going to use warp tool. So what we need to do in Photoshop is we need to duplicate the background. So I just come down, you can see in my layer palette over here on the right, I've duplicated my background. And then I'm going to hit Control T. You can also go to Edit, Free Transform. It's the same thing, but in the PC, it's Control T is the shortcut. And at the very, very top here, there's this little warp tool. It kind of looks like a windshield. It's to the left of the check mark and the cancel button. It's right here. And so I click on that, and you can see that around the photograph, now I have a couple of balls in the corner and it's outlined in blue. If you come into grid and change the default, you can change this grid into like 3x3, you get a tic-tac-toe, you can do 5x5. You can actually do a custom, you could do like 16x16. The more precise you are, the less movement you're going to get throughout the rest of the image. And so let me go back into 3x3 really quick, just to give you an idea. I want you to think of warp as going to your bed and you take your hand and you pick up the sheet and you move it around. So I'm just going to move this ball around really quick. You can see how it moves the image, right? Now that's obviously not what I want right now, but I just want you to see that. And so I'm going to undo that really quick. Come back in. I'm going to go to default. And so with this particular image, that corner for me sort of bothered me. And so I take the ball in the bottom corner here. You can see I'm holding on to it. And I just move it out of the frame. And maybe I want that line to come down a little bit. I don't necessarily want to spin it. I'm getting a little excited here. But maybe I want to move that part down. Maybe I don't like that. And, maybe I can move, I don't know if I love that line there. I can move that line down here. I can move things around. Warp literally is warping your pixels, and it's moving things around. And so with a horizon, for example, let's pretend like this is a horizon that's crooked. It kind of tilts down a little bit, right? So I can do Control T again. I'm going to come up into Free Transform. It's going to give me the grid. And what we can do with this, let me step back for a second. Hang on, this will be easier to show the demo. Let me do this again. Just get rid of that. Okay, there we go. So I'll just go 3x3, and it's tilting down a little bit. So to straighten out the horizon, I just pull up the shoulders of the image. I don't have to crop it. And so for me, this becomes very, very magical. Fixing distortion with a wide angle lens, fixing horizons that are crooked accidentally, moving things into positions that maybe they weren't before, things like that. So inevitably, people are going to ask me about whether that's ethical or moral or whatever. There's two different things. There's two different perspectives to manipulation. The first is creativity. Creativity is anything goes. If you're involved with contests and whatnot, they will have their own rules and requirements. You have to follow those. They're their rules. You play their game, you play it by their rules. For creativity, anything goes. If I am working on a magazine assignment, if I'm doing editorial outlet, I'm not making major, massive manipulations like I just showed you, because I have to present the scene as it was when I photographed it. If someone were to go to this location and see this, I can't be clone stamping out, power lines if power lines were there. And so I use the warp tool for my creative work. I don't use it for my editorial work. I just there is a distinction, and I just want to make that very clear. But as far as I'm concerned, if you're in a creative space, anything goes. So that's the warp. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. That's very good explanation, by the way. And I like the way you can put more grid points in there if you want to make small adjustments as opposed to coarse adjustments.
It's super powerful. It's super fun.
Super.
It's super fun. Warp and vignette are my two favorites. Okay.
All righty. Any other
Good question.
questions?
Thank you for
Yeah,
that
it was
question.
excellent question. Any other questions out there? I don't know, Colleen, you're competing here with one of our best presenters so far. That was terrific. I loved it. And you know what I liked about it is you did a presentation that was not photography based, in that control this and control alt delete shift that. You talked about philosophy, you talked about awareness, your personality, and all those things that, oh, by the way, you're capturing with your camera. And that was really a very good perspective, and it was a surprise to me, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good. Good. Yeah. I mean, this is the cheapest piece of equipment in photography. It's right here. It's
That's
free.
right.
It's your brain.
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to have Colleen here in January, to provide the inspiration, to provide the motivation, provide, that the photography is all about you, not anybody else. And I think she achieved that
Yeah. Hopefully.
stupendously.
Why, thank you. Thank you both for that great feedback. I appreciate it. And I obviously appreciate the opportunity to share with you and talk with you. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it and are excited for the new year.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much.